Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Weil. This is the Jupyter Frontends call for Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. We've got 7 participants on the call. If you have not already, please sign in on the agenda. And if you have an agenda item to discuss, please add it to our agenda so we can discuss it on the record or off the record. The first topic that I wanted to discuss came up at triage yesterday. We do issue triage on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific, and it concerns the copyright notices in Jupyter, which all have a year. They all say copyright X or copyright X to Y, Project Jupyter. And I was discussing this in my team. We discussed it a little bit in triage, but we never discussed it on the record. Is there an official like Jupyter stance on including a year? I have read some things that suggest that this is not necessary if what you're doing is source controlled, but I'm curious about what other members of the community have to say about that. No thoughts about this? All right. Well, if nobody has anything to contribute about it, that's all I had to talk about. Um, Mike's next up on the agenda to talk about a couple of topics of his. Go ahead.
Okay, so I will share my screen and try to present work that I recently did to enable resizing columns. Okay, let's see. Does it work?
All right, so I'm sorry, I need to drop. I'm going to leave. I just made Mike the full host, and I will see you next week. Goodbye, guys.
Thanks for hosting. So this is the JupyterLab code base, and this is the file browser. After adding an ability to resize columns, and so the last modified column is responsive as it was before. Now the columns can be resized to basically the minimum width, which can reasonably be applied, and that works with whatever set of columns you decide to have. So by default, we have just 2 columns, and that's not particularly interesting, but yeah. The pull request is ready for review, and if anyone has feedback or would be happy to review and approve that, so that we can push it out for testing, it would be amazing to get feedback on this one. Okay, so my other agenda items, I see there are some comments. One is that the context menu options could be under a button in the toolbar. And that's, yeah, I think this is a good idea to expose the additional columns somehow. But that's probably for another pull request. So my other item is just to highlight that the date for opening new pull requests targeting 4.3 has passed. That was the end of Monday anywhere on Earth. It was Monday the 5th. So for me, that was yesterday. If you would like to help with reviewing pull requests targeting 4.3, that would be greatly appreciated. Otherwise, if you have a pull request that you know that is not in the final stage and will need substantially more work, please do indicate that, and we can bump it to the 4.4 just to make that easier to track which pull requests need attention from reviewers. Checking if there is anything else in the agenda, but I don't see any other topics. So I think Tony is asking if today was supposed to be an accessibility meeting. Do we have any accessibility updates or any accessibility related points? Anything else that you would like to be on the record? Okay.
I'm just good. I came today because I thought that the plan was that these meetings were an accessibility meeting. And everybody seemed really excited about that, but that didn't happen. And I think that sucks. So I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I hope that the accessibility regrouping can actually happen. Otherwise, it appears performative.
I do think that you are right that the plan was in the discussions that I've seen that the accessibility sub-project members will try to make that into the first meeting of every month when possible, and if there are any accessibility topics, those should take priority on the meeting. But well, maybe there wasn't any. Let's try to make sure to remind everyone on the accessibility sub-project that this was the plan, but I'm also understanding that this is middle of August and some folks might be on vacation.
Yeah, that's okay. It's just that this, I'm not pointing this directly at anybody. We disbanded accessibility because we weren't serving disabled people. And it just continues that way. So I really hope that we can find a way to, if we're going to do this, so it's not just a nominal effort, we can actually include accessibility. Again, this is not on anybody in specific. There was a lot of fervor around redistributing the accessibility stuff, but that did not happen. I hope it can. Thanks.
So are there concerns from the late great accessibility meeting that have not been broached in the broader context of this developer meeting? I guess that would be the question. Because there's a lot of folks that might just not be familiar with what the breadth of that was. I mean, who's even I'm not looking at the Brady Bunch. What do we got here? Who's even here today?
It's not all that big of a crew. So yeah,
okay.
People do deserve some grace because it is the holiday, yeah. But at the same time too, when these efforts flounder or take on a nominal meaning, then it's hard to keep going. Sure. So I don't think we actually talked much with the front ends group about moving accessibility over, except that everybody was for it, and we didn't really talk about what that actually meant. So now we have this meeting that probably needs a little bit more purpose and design.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so I am looking at the whole list. Not a big list today, and that's just what it is today. So, I'll throw my hat in on one of the things that would start driving things forward, and that is making use of the same tools that. So, all right, if you are not disabled and you do not have that perspective, and I'm not saying you don't have that empathy, but you don't have that perspective, and that's not an everyday thing that you worry about, then it becomes a thing that you can treat more like any other aspect of code, whether that's security or documentation or soundness of typing or coverage or anything like that. So this is a thing I'll keep ponying out there. And the way that we measure that is according to standards. So if you're not going to fire up a screen reader, right, how can we get that standard assessment closer into our stuff? And from one of the earlier discussions on here, getting that into Galata, if that is the approved and holy thing that's in there, that would be the first most major step. And I know we've got some stuff in there, right? So we've started adjusting the selectors to being based on ARIA labels, ARIA roles, stuff like that.
By the way, is there like a screen reader emulator that developers could use, for instance?
So that's kind of one of the challenges, right? If you're not using a Windows computer with the main plugin, or an Apple computer with the one that's built in, the readers, yeah, nice. The readers are like browsers, right? Every reader interacts with DOM in a little bit different way. So the readers perceive things like that is the truth. If you're designing for, what do we got here? Chat. Yeah, you got that one. The Firefox one is actually a little bit better. It actually has a little bit more. It's a little bit better informed by what the readers actually do, rather than the letter of WCAG, the set of standards that we're interested in. So I guess the way that you look at it is, if you want to put a business spin on it, and I don't see anybody here in here. William cares about it from a business perspective. To get your product into a curriculum in the United States, I'm going to narrow it down tightly to that. Your stuff has to be compliant with Section 508, which is a federal law, which describes a subset of WCAG that your stuff has to meet, right? And so if no Jupyter product can fulfill that baseline, then it cannot be included in a publicly funded curriculum. And that's just like brass tacks. That's just what it actually is. And so the folks that we've actually talked to, have identified things like, if you have a test that uses Jupyter and someone is blind, then they need to have someone sit in the room with them and tell them what's going on in order to do that.
Oh man,
right?
I've heard some crazy stories about that too, because you have to get a scribe, and then you have to assume that scribe is going to be literate in your master's data science class, right? So this is actually a really hokey thing that's sort of happening, is like the literacy of the support people isn't enough to support people using Jupyter in some of the experiences we've heard.
Right. And then if you're that's even assuming everybody speaks the Queen's English, right?
Right.
King's English now, my bad. If you are rolling up in non-English and technical jargon and domain jargon and Jupyter jargon, I mean, good luck. That's a tough gig. So I would love to see if only from a business perspective, if we looked into how Section 508, at least as a subset of WCAG, could be assessed during the runs of JupyterLab. Let's just start there, or start with Notebook, or whatever is the appropriate place that would have an impact on things getting better, and give us more of a continuous assessment. Go for it.
Right. No, that's good. The only comment I have, it's like a little anachronistic, because so Section 508's based on WCAG 2.0, and the European Accessibility Act that goes into effect next year needs to be WCAG 2.2 compliant. And I know to a lot of folks that 2.2 sounds like more than 2.0, but 2.2 actually reduces some ambiguities. So we could start working towards 2.0, but like effectively by next year, we really need to be WCAG 2.2 compliant. Otherwise, we're going to run into some problems in Europe, and people are getting way more litigious with accessibility now.
Sure. So what are the tools that we have in our arsenal for that? And Mike points out the development time tools. That's great. You have to open those and you have to look. There are a bunch of overlay plugins that some of them are in the browser that will get stuff kind of like the translation layer thing that we saw demoed last week, which was very rad. It's very rad, but also tied to a third-party plugin that you have to allow into your code space and therefore all of your data. Same with browser plugins. You have to give them tremendous access to everything that you have inside. And that's going to happen with anything JavaScript and anything browser-based. There's no issue with that.
Yeah, but we're hardly there, right? Like we need baseline notebook testing.
It's probably my mic. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's Nick's mic. Yeah, no, we need, we're missing community agreement on what our target is. And I think to the community, everything looks like a moving target until we figure out what that target is. So these meetings would be really great in figuring out what that target is. But now we're going to wait till September. I don't really know how to start kicking off that conversation because it's really broad and wide reaching. So if anybody has any ideas about how to start maybe supplementing September's meeting by having some asynchronous discussion before there and including people, then maybe we're rallied to do this. But yeah, we need a plan to make September a little bit more accessible and start chipping away at some of these real goals that are going to kick us in the butt if we don't deal with them.
I do think that having this as an asynchronous discussion on an issue would be probably easier than gathering everyone on this meeting.
Agreed. One of the shortcomings,
at least having an issue saying that we want to discuss that on a synchronous meeting might allow some people to arrange their calendars to ensure that they will be present.
I agree. Yeah, if we can start driving the conversation about how to get testing in and planning for, I think we keep planning for now, but what if we could plan for 6 months or, 8 months out? Is it a little bit different potentially?
And
even right now we're reacting too much to the technology, and the constraints of WCAG are changing much slower than the technology is. So if we could ground the two to each other, that would help.
Yeah, I mean I think a potentially low risk place to land initially as single PR or single line. It wouldn't be a single line. It would be a line in a package JSON, and it would be a line in an ESLint config. Is get the ESLint A11Y linter rules turned on.
Okay.
They don't do everything. They don't do everything, but they start doing some stuff, right? There are some JSX ally ones for places where we have decided to pay that troll. And these will, that would still start helping us hit some structural things.
Yep.
And that is going to be per keystroke, which is huge. So if you've got your editor set up, or you've got, Jupyter LSP set up or whatever, and it's grokking your ESLint, then that's a spot. That's a place to start. So like concrete one would be investigate what static analysis we can add. And that would then have the follow-on of being added to the baseline config for extensions. So the extension template would then also start bringing that in, because that's where, getting it done in JupyterLab is fine. If you drop in and replace a core element that we have invested a lot in making accessible with another element that is not accessible, then that's not moving anything forward. So part of that could be, do we have an ESLint baseline config as a package? I don't believe we do.
You are correct. The defaults which are shipped in the extension template are hard-coded in package.json.
Nice.
No comments on this choice, but I think that what you propose in general is rather uncontroversial.
Yeah.
If you know the rules, maybe it will be required to only enable them for certain packages. I think that's actually not possible, but basically disable them where they are not, and at the very least make sure that we do not introduce further regressions,
right,
by enabling them where they pass. And that's like a first step, and then work on removing the disabled rules as we go.
Right. So
this is for the authoring process, right? So like you all are saying, like these linting tools would help make authoring accessibility. Oh Christ, author is even ambiguous, isn't it? Who's the author that you guys are helping right now?
Well, this is strictly, this is not the author of a notebook. This is the author of JupyterLab core or an extension or an application that reuses those code. So,
okay. And reviewers.
And reviewers, so they wouldn't have to look for certain things, because the linter would have found it and it would have showed up in the code QL and it would be in the line of code that was changed. So so maybe that's the first actionable step we could take would be, one, create a JupyterLab ESLint config baseline. That could be done independent of JupyterLab itself, and could start becoming part of downstream extension templates and become part of the notebook assessment stuff, and we reuse that in JupyterLite and all that good stuff. So that's fine. In parallel to that, no, I wouldn't be in parallel, but strictly blocked by that, in some sequential order, would be adding the best of breed accessibility static analysis that we can for the stuff that we're putting in there. So I don't know if the web component stuff has some things for that in the UI toolkit. I don't know if you have to turn on the accessibility features. I haven't even looked. Certainly JSX has places where you can go.
So can I stop you real fast? What I think I'm hearing is, what accessibility toggles do our third parties have that we can turn on? Because this is like Xterm too, and whatever other third party thing is, it's like MathJax, right? Like basically it sounds like we're auditing our downstream products and saying, hey, we are going to, because like if you bring in crowd in, then you have to accept their inaccessibility and their accessibility. So basically, we have to like audit third-party packages and say we're going to accept this degree of accessibility and accessibility kind of deal.
Yeah, so that would be a strong thing to list on. Well, we don't actually have anywhere that does this, right? Like, what is JupyterLab built of that's not in this repo? What can you not see?
Right.
And so having an annotated package.json, something derived from package.jsons.
Well, like this gets to the docs group, right? Because like, say for example, like CodeMirror. If I want to go and change CodeMirror settings, I got to look in between JupyterLab and CodeMirror sometimes, right? But it's almost like centralizing the docs sort of centralizes the third parties that we have to concern, right?
Right. I mean,
So like,
we can't use, what we can use is that third-party licenses file, because that's not going to include build tools that we don't care about, right?
right.
Like, if some CLI tool uses colors that don't have appropriate whatever, or they're colorblind, no one cares, right? What matters is what we ship to the front end. So an input to a documentation process would be take the most recent shipped third-party licenses.json inside of JupyterLab and start filling in links to the documentation for accessibility for each of those things. That's a one-time manual thing. Put it on the link check bus, and now there's at least a place to look, which is, that would be cool. So that's like another thing that's out as a parallel effort. Yeah. Oh, so many Tonys, millions of Tonys. Now there's two of them.
Yeah, I hear you. Thanks, man.
So that would be concrete. Linting, documentation, and then the Galata discussion. So what? Refresh me again. I am studiously aloof of the architecture of Galata. It is just under the hood, or what is it? Playwright is the overarching test infrastructure that it lives on top of.
Yes,
okay.
There is. It's a very thin wrapper around Playwright, basically adding some helpers. And the page.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, when it comes to the testing stuff, like what? All right. Actually, this challenge is general in everything, with even the linters, which is getting these things in place sounds cheap, but normalizing the inaccessibility or the errors or remediating the errors might be really costly, right? So how do you go and take a fire hose of accessibility information and start turning that into action?
Well, to be frank, if something is a part of the build process or the CI, and it rises an error, then the pull request will not be merged. And if we agree to set that as a standard and a part of our CI, this is at least improving that there is no new regressions and that new code will be okay. But
no. So I get that. It's more that like I make that pull request, that first pull request. I kick CI and now it runs. And now I've got 20 different web inaccessibilities that I have to go and fix, right? Like this is a big pull. There's a potential for a really heavy lift after getting the CI installed, right? Like it's probably going to be like a pull request that stays open for a month or two. So it's not like a skill set for just anybody to solve this, I don't think.
And this is again, having gone down this road on proprietary products, it's establish the baseline and get the best data you can and continue to improve the data gathering process. So like We added that with the profiler stuff for performance. You know, we got to start gathering the data. And then all of these tools allow you to create exceptions. And so we start that first PR, that the title of that would be initialize the set of ignored accessibility findings. Right? Get a number. Well, it'd get a data frame of this number of tests have this number of violations of these kinds.
So kind of work with Steve probably and put something in the build to start that just says currently there are 39 ACTS violations. Find out how to contribute kind of deal.
Right,
so,
right.
So
I mean,
on the SLint example, that would be as simple as turning them into warnings. And we have a history of a new rule was added. It was a warning first. We squashed all warnings. We enabled that rule for good. So this is a process that we went through a couple of times, and it works.
Yes,
warnings annoy developers.
That's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Oh, yeah.
I like that. What I've actually been like, so I in order to do like the retrofitting of accessibility stuff, I've like turned it into a data science problem first, bring everything together and kind of look at stuff there. But when you run ACTS, the only assertion that you get to make is that this is to be accessible, right? So that means that every ACTS violation falls under the same umbrella of not to be accessible. So what I've actually had to do is like break out parts, right? So like if I have IPy widgets in my system, I have to ignore that so that I can get the accessibility thing. So I actually have to say that this violation is expected to arise. So we might actually need like a little bit finer resolution into the exceptions that we're getting with ACTS. But I think that from what you guys are saying, it sounds like there's a potential path forward if we go the non-error route and maybe say like 6 or 9 months we turn on errors.
Well, I mean, once they
get there,
like, I don't think this is the thing. You don't want to discourage a new contribution in a raft of thousands of unrelated warnings. So there is also a distinction between code that changed on this PR and code that did not. Because, well, otherwise it's everybody's problem, So, yeah. No, I think there's certainly some angles there. And again, for the, everybody's heard this before, but yeah, see you later. Everybody's heard this line before, but ACTS, the accessibility checkers, all those things are only ever going to get you to that like 60%. And the only goal of ACTS and all that is to not give you false positives.
Right.
That's their whole purpose in life, is to give you actionable information and not BS. So that being said, getting that list from, we have identified this number of problems and then found a way to start improving upon them. If you get to all that, now you're in that space where it's like, now we need to write a damn grant to get a disabled developer on Coin, and maybe the CNCF stuff has something good to do with that, to start doing that holistic view of it. And that's where the screen reader emulator comes back in, if such a thing were to exist. But it's not really the long con.
Yeah, the best case scenario would be employing multiple developers.
Yeah. Getting screen reader under test is actually a giant pain in the ass, because those are heavyweight applications and they need to control at the operating system level how your UI toolkit works upon which the browsers are built. That is something for which Node.js is not greatly suited. And then the worst thing is that it mostly runs on Windows, which is not greatly suited for anything. So that
I gotta ask Mike a question real fast. Mike, are you saying that Playwright's integrated or Axe is integrated into Playwright now?
So it has a dedicated page which shows how to set it up, and I guess they are in some way supporting that.
It's not much different than actually just using Axe core.
Yes, what my other message was saying is that they added specific assertions to validate, like, does this element have an accessible role, etc. 2 versions ago, so sometime this year.
Okay.
So there is some enhancements, some progress on the Playwright side, and we are getting that naturally as we upgrade to newer versions. But yes, setting up Axe with Playwright is something that needs to be done manually, but it seems to be very easy based on the snippets that they are providing in documentation. Maybe that wasn't the case before, but it looks simple now.
Good. And then the other tip.
Sorry, I interrupted you, bro.
Getting that into the report.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's a new tab that you run the entire Galata suite for an hour and it finds all these problems, I need to be able to go to my test that failed and see the relevant accessibility findings of that specific test, and not across the whole thing, because it's very hard to solve these things. Like if the index of your data frame starts with the WCAG finding, it's going to be a really long with the ID of the rule that you were violating. It's going to be a really hard to consume table. You could have someone roll up and be like, I'm going to fix WCAG whatever 1 2 3 4 across the entire application. I don't. That's going to be mostly on the Lumino side. That's the only place that you're going to really be able to like hammer down on stuff like that. And yeah, we really need to land this stuff on the Lumino side, a lot of it, right? But there's so much React in the lab code base that has nothing to do with Lumino. That's why the linters and stuff like that will actually have a positive impact. So,
well, I wonder if there's a way to talk with the folks who are working on the widgets and the components to see if they can start cramming Axe into some of their workflows and maybe catch some of that stuff a little bit sooner. Because the nice thing is Axe handles web components well. It handles web components better than most of the other testing tools do.
Yeah. So this is good. So what do we come up with? We've got, I guess this is the thing that would go on there, into the notes. So one, provide a JupyterLab ESLint. It's probably going to end up being a couple of packages, right? So there would be, there'd be recommended, and recommended would grow to include the accessibility stuff. There would be baseline, there'd be some base config, which is just like, whatever our absolute lowest common denominator stuff is just like stuff that you don't want to do that's done. And then lab itself would, of course, configure that for itself. Notebook would configure that for itself. So it's probably those 2 packages, right? That seems to be kind of the convention. I guess you could have a third for best practices, but linter package, then introduce the accessibility into the best practices one initially, because if JupyterLab can't follow its own best practices, then it shouldn't be part of a core kind of style guide. That seems pretty straightforward. So then the Galata tip and the documentation tip. Those sound like concrete ways forward.
They do. It is a lot. The trouble is that this work is a lot, requires like quite a few stakeholders. So in the future, we got to make sure to figure out how to stay organized on this stuff, I think. All right, Mike, how do you suggest we move this conversation forward after the meeting ends, do you think? Because it definitely, I think it's like there's a critical responsibility to get this async conversation happening and raising some awareness. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm not hopeful for accessibility.
I think opening dedicated issues on JupyterLab for the like 4 action points that were raised, and then opening a meta issue on the Jupyter accessibility repo would be best, because ultimately most of these things live in JupyterLab and should be solved here. We can start with adding like good first issue for some of them. Definitely adding S-linked rules via third-party package. That's an easy one. At least easy to start. And then we can, if there are more controversial parts or parts which need input from more people, we can collect feedback by just having this issue open on the accessibility subproject repo.
I
suggest.
I like all of that, except I'm wondering if we should archive Jupyter accessibility and move that to the front end team's compass. Like accessibility is not watched by as many people. And one of the challenges that we acknowledged with the accessibility meeting was that we were disconnected from the front ends group. So I think in some way the Jupyter accessibility repo might be a little othering. And if we're combining these meetings, maybe we should make sure the digital infrastructure mimics the real life one.
So I would think that there is value in keeping that repo separate from thinking about governance structure. I would say there is value there because the frontends and JupyterLab trackers are more busy, and being able to find accessibility related discussions.
I think I'm thinking more on the team compass than on the repo, on the source repos.
I know what you mean. And I think that on the team compass that wouldn't be that much of a problem, but there is also like this problem of too many people to take action in a sense. I don't know if you agree.
So
if you would
I agree with you, right? So we've got this problem where it's too many people to take action. It's too many people to take action, and then the accessibility side's too few people to take action. So it's like we need something sort of in the middle there.
What happened before when there were discussions which required input from many people was like one canonical issue on one repo, and then there was an issue linking to that issue on the other repo or other repos. So maybe that's the way to go. I do not have a strong opinion on where the canonical issue. If you think that this is better suited for the front-end Steam Compass, let's go there. But
I'm trying to talk that out, right? I'm not trying to like make a choice myself, right? Because
yeah,
I'm trying to address some challenges that accessibility has had, right? Like the executive council is not accessibility literate. So would putting this in the front ends possibly help people gain a little bit more literacy? Like I keep thinking about like, you know, the distance of accessibility from like we need math. We've done a good job at getting advocacy in the community for accessibility, but we haven't done a good job at getting action. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to create action through going through another channel here where accessibility might not be the best place.
No, and I think I agree with your thinking in the sense that I agree with the part. Let's open the meta issue in the front ends compass, and then also keep that linked some way with the other team compass repo for accessibility.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thanks for your input on that. Yeah, and running the meeting.
Okay, do we have anything else that we want to have on record, or is that all? Hey, otherwise,
Well, that's all I can think of.
brace yourselves.